But when Bush is inaugurated, you'll all have to say it at breakfast every day. Oh, that's interesting. I think we'll go here, huh? Can you hear this all right? You can hear the instrument all right, too? I'm going to talk a little and read some poems, and I'll use the instrument occasionally with the poem. For those of you who don't know it, it's a bouzouki. It's a Greek instrument. It's really the Arab lute that the Arabs brought to Spain. So it was used in the 13th and 14th century for poetry, too. And the old tradition with poetry is that you have always a little bit of music. Not too interesting. So that you can hear, your bodies can hear the strings. And it said that a poem is also a string. We have poems like this. Then you have Rod McEwen poems like this. John Denver poems. So the general theme of this series has been Midwestern writers. And so they've asked me to make a couple of remarks about myself as a poet who lives in the Midwest. I myself was born on a farm west of here, about 150 miles. My ancestors were Norwegian immigrants who came around 1855 to the area near Chicago and then came up here around 1888. So I had a bad high school like everyone else. And usually if you get out of a Minnesota high school, you'll never read poetry again for the rest of your life. That's something they promise the parents before you go in. But actually, one of the things that happened to me there was that there was a very beautiful woman who was an English teacher. She had marvelous legs, and she used to sit on the radiator sometimes. And I think this has something to do with my writing poetry. I thought if she likes it, it cannot be all bad. And actually, I gave a reading in St. Paul about 5 years ago, and she was there. Some other people say, well, I was inspired by Goethe, you know, but I don't say that. Then I went to St. Olaf, where my ancestors, some of the Blythes had been hanging out for a while. And there I fell in love with a woman who wrote poetry, and I tried to write some to impress her. It didn't work. But I was surprised that when I wrote the poem, it was as if there was something on the page that I didn't put there. And those of you who write poetry, and I see many of them in the audience who do, will recognize that. It's very odd. You intend to put down something and something else appears, considerably deeper than what you intended to put down. So it's as if there are two people inside of us. One is the one that passes examinations, and the other one is the one that writes a poem. And we can't tell one from the other most of the time. Then I transferred east to school, and there I had marvelous teachers of W.B. Yeats, for example. And it was really through my admiration of W.B. Yeats that I decided I wanted to spend my life writing poetry. So then I went to New York, and I lived there for a couple of years, doing nothing, just being neurotic in the way appropriate to 24-year-olds. And that's an old way of advancing into poetry, which is sort of dropping through, having no job, no friends, no help. That's the old way. So I did that, and my favorite building was the New York Public Library. And I'm going to begin by reading you a poem that I wrote in the New York Public Library when I found the old version of the Noah story. The Babylonians did the story first, and they had two more birds in it that somehow got lost when they made the Bible. But a lot of things got lost when people made the Bible, so two birds aren't perfect. But anyway. It's called Where We Must Look for Help. And the theme is, when you're in your 20s and you don't know who you are, you have no idea. In general, you've been lying for about 21 years if you're 22. Remember how we lied all the way through high school? It's hard to know who you are. It's hard to know where your help is going to come from. Am I saying anything to you or not? Sometimes that lasts until you're 70. So I wrote this little poem. The dove returned. It found no resting place. It was in flight all night above the shaken seas. Give the dove peace. On the next day, the blue-tailed swallow flies out and returns. The split-tailed swallow returns. On the third day, the crow shall fly. The crow. The crow. The crow, the spider-colored crow. The crow shall find new mud to walk upon. See, in the Babylonian, in our version, in the Christian and Judaic version, a dove is sent out, if you remember, and the dove brings back a little bit of green. In the Babylonian version, they send the dove out, and he comes back with nothing. Politically, this reminded me of really soft types who come back with, they're too peaceful. Then they send the split-tailed swallow out. And that's sort of like, with me it was like Adlai Stevenson, Senator Eugene McCarthy. They don't come back with much. I don't know, they're too intelligent or something. The split-tailed swallow leaves the sill at dawn. At dusk, blue swallow shall return. On the third day, the crow shall fly. It's hard to find a crow in politics. Someone like Lincoln was a crow. On the third day, the crow shall fly. The crow, the spider-colored crow. The crow shall find new mud to walk upon. So when the crow came back, they found mud on the bottom of his feet. And that's when they guessed that the water had gone down. So to me, it meant that, among other things, having been in school, in high school, and college, I was too far in my head, as they say. If I looked at the bottom of my feet, there was no mud on them. Does this make any sense to you? So the question is, how do you find mud? Well, the story says that being black is helpful. And looking for black is helpful, not always being obsessed with pink and light blue and hopefulness and gentleness and gentility. Getting used to the color black is all right. Sometimes that means 5 or 10 years of depression, you know. But just remember, you're being a crow all that time. Don't know if that's helpful or not. After you have found a little bit of black and you have lived a little bit in black, then several things happen. You get disgusted if people don't have any minors in their personality at all. I'd sometimes go to Lutheran churches in which the minister had nothing of this. All he had is, I still go, but I don't listen. Nothing more dangerous than a professionally cheerful person. They can kill you. So therefore, from this point of view, I'll just jump a little. Well, what I did then was to come back to Minnesota, and I went to a little farm that my father had saved for me, though he knew that I was never going to be a poet. Never going to be a writer. My grandmother told him when I was 7, said to my father, "This boy's not going to be a farmer, try to get it through your head." And he did very well. He got it through his head. And he never bugged me about it. So eventually I came back, and I'll read you a few poems that I wrote. So feeling mud on your feet has to do, I think, with living somewhere where you can feel the earth. Oftentimes, in writers, that means living where you were born. With me, it was a big help to go back to the western Minnesota because I didn't know huge words like spirit, soul, religion. I didn't know what they meant, but the word snow I understood. And I knew the word dust. I knew the word cornstalk. And, you know, the problem is to make poems out of only those words. It's not so hard if you write short poems. So I'll read you a poem that I wrote then. We had an old farmhouse with no water in it, so we had to go and pump water every day for the horse. And I was pumping water for the horse one day, and I wrote this little poem, which I'll read to you, called Watering the Horse. How strange to think of giving up all ambition. See, in college, they told us as poets we had to be very ambitious. Always send poems to the New Yorker every week. But the Buddhists say, forget it. Poetry and being ambitious don't mix at all. So here's a little poem. How strange to think of giving up all ambition. Suddenly I see with such clear eyes the white flake of snow that has just fallen on the horse's mane. How strange to think of giving up all ambition. Suddenly I see with such clear eyes the white flake of snow that has just fallen in the horse's mane. You understand the Buddhist point of view? Oh, good. Thank you. Yes, even little poems deserve a little applause. The Buddhists say if you're really interested in ambition and what your income tax is and so on, you'll look out and see a lot of snow. But the aim is not to see a lot of snow, but to see one snowflake. How strange to think of giving up all ambition. Suddenly I see with such clear eyes the white flake of snow that has just fallen in the horse's mane. Well, such a poem as that does not contribute to the gross national product. And usually you get about $2 for it. And then people complain it isn't longer. That's all. They always do that too. All right, I'm going to read you one more poem. Since we're talking about the Middle West, I'll read you this poem. We used to go sometimes to the east and drive through Wisconsin on the way to Chicago before the thruways came in. And this is a little poem about driving along on old Wisconsin roads approaching Chicago. And they say that you can write poetry best about something that's never been described before. I was aware that no poet had described the telephone poles going whoosh, 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 when you go by. And also it is fantastic to see Chicago looming up with its glowing red evil light in the afternoon. Here's a little poem. 3 kinds of pleasures. Sometimes riding in a car in Wisconsin or Illinois, you notice those dark telephone poles, one by one, lift themselves out of the fence line and slowly leap on the gray sky. And past them, the snowy field. Second, the darkness drifts down like snow on the picked cornfields in Wisconsin. And on these black trees scattered one by one through the winter fields. We see stiff weeds and brownish stubble and white snow, left now only in the wheel tracks of the combine. Third stanza. It's a pleasure also to be driving toward Chicago near dark and see the lights in the barns. You know that? You're driving along and suddenly there's a farmer there who's gone out to milk his cows. It's a pleasure also to be driving toward Chicago near dark and see the lights in the barns. The bare trees more dignified than ever, like a fierce man on his deathbed. And the ditches along the road half full of a private snow. So, you know, we can all feel that longing for privacy even when you're in a car driving toward Chicago. All private things look so wonderful because you know pretty soon you're going to be at a party and say a lot of stupid things. The snow looks so honest. I originally had Andrew Jackson down here because I admired him a lot. And he shot a man to death who insulted his wife. I mean, it's all right. It's all right. If Dukakis had done that, we'd all be better off. Anyway. It's a pleasure also to be driving toward Chicago near dark and see the lights in the barn. The bare trees more dignified than ever, like Andrew Jackson on his deathbed. But I had to take out Andrew. You understand what he does? He takes over the whole stanza. His name is so big. The bare trees more dignified than ever, like a fierce man on his deathbed. And the ditches along the road half full of a private snow. So, I think I'll do one more. This is also from Silence in the Snowy Fields. All of these things are about privacy and being alone. I'd been working in my chicken house for a while, and then I went inside and I started working on a poem, and I had my back to the window, and when I looked up from the poem, it had become night and moonlight. And when I looked out the window, I was astounded. The whole farmyard was covered by moonlight. Well, again, if you've had a shock, you can write a poem. So I'll read you what I wrote. After working, after many strange thoughts, thoughts of distant harbors and new life, I came in and found the moonlight lying in the room. Outside, it covers the trees like pure sound. The sound of tower bells or water moving under the ice. The sound of the deaf hearing through the bones of their heads. That was the best line. You know, you're trying to describe moonlight, and I failed 2 or 3 times, but I finally got it. So, outside it covers the trees like pure sound. Well, now I'd have to ask myself, which sound? Outside it covers the trees like pure sound, like the sound of tower bells. Well, maybe, but which tower? How tall a tower? The sound of water moving under the ice. That's a little better, isn't it? And I got a good one. The sound of the deaf hearing through the bones of their heads. That's more like moonlight. 3rd stanza. We know the road. We know the road. As the moonlight lifts everything, so on a night like this, the road goes on ahead. It is all clear. I forget who it was. Thank you. Someone called those moments peak experiences, which you suddenly see exactly the way things should go for the next 3 or 4 years. And you better write it down right away, because someone inside of you will start to erase it within a couple of days. A poem can be considered just a way to preserve a moment like that, so you don't forget it. It's also true of a painting, true of a musical composition. We know the road. We know the road. As the moonlight lifts everything, so in a night like this, the road goes on ahead. It is all clear. So that's the kind of feelings you have when you're about 30 or so. And then after a while you get kids, and then everything becomes not clear. Is that clear? I'll read poems for another 10 or 15 minutes. And I'll read this poem, which is the only one I'd intended to read when I came here. This is called 11 o'clock at night. You know, there's such a thing as limitation in this world. Limitations on what you can do and be. They say there are 12 limitors in this world who block everything. So you can meditate for 3 weeks and then you become stupid again. They're the limiters. They're connected apparently to the 12 signs, astrological signs. So we're all limited anyway, because being only one of the signs, it means we only have 1/12 of the unconscious. So what can we do with only 1/12? Just read those astrology things in the paper, that's all. So I'm going to read a poem when I was about 45 probably when I wrote this, and I didn't have a sense so much that I could escape and go. Did you feel that sense of escape in those first poems? Did you feel it? That's wonderful. You feel that in your 20s. And it's a good thing, and you need to follow it as much as you can. But it turns out that it doesn't work. You can become a Japanese Buddhist, and it won't do any good. You're still a Norwegian Lutheran. I tried that. I'm still a Norwegian Lutheran. I don't have to be a dumb one, but I'm still one. So our limitations are put on this all over, and it's all right. I'll read you this poem, and it was in Baudelaire that I saw the greatest ability at feeling limitation. He is marvelous in that. And as you know, he was in a depression most of his life. All of his poems are written in that state. I'll read you this poem, 11 o'clock at night. I lie alone in my bed. Cooking and stories are over at last, and some peace comes. And what did I do today? I wrote down some thoughts on sacrifice that other people had, but I couldn't relate them to my own life. I brought my daughter to the bus on the way to Minneapolis for a haircut and waited 20 minutes with her in the Somnolent Hotel lobby. I wanted the mail to bring some praise for my ego to eat, and I was disappointed. I added up my bank balance and I found only $65, where I need over $1,000 to pay the bills for this month alone. So this is how my life is passing before the grave. The walnut of my brain glows. I feel it irradiate the skull. I'm aware of the consciousness I have, and I mourn the consciousness I do not have. Stubborn things lie and stand around me. The walls, a bookcase with its few books, the footboard of the bed, my shoes that lay against the blanket tentatively, as if they were animals sitting at the dinner table, my stomach with its curved demand. I see the bedside lamp and the thumb of my right hand, the pen my fingers hold so trustingly. There is no way to escape from these. Many times in poems I have escaped from myself. I sit for hours, and at last I see a pinhole in the tip of the pumpkin, and I slip out the pinhole, gone. The genie expands and is gone. No one can get him back in the bottle again. He is hovering over a car cemetery somewhere. Now more and more I long for what I cannot escape from. The sun shines on the side of the house across the street. Eternity is near, but it's not here. My shoes, my thumbs, my stomach remain inside the room, and for that, there is no solution. Consciousness comes so slowly. Half our life passes. We eat and talk asleep. For that, there is no solution. Since Pythagoras died, the world has gone down a certain path, and I cannot prevent that. Someone not in my family invented the microscope. And then Western eyes got the intense desire to peer down through its deepening tunnel. Air itself is willing without pay to lift the 707's wing. Air itself is willing without pay to lift the 707's wing. And for that, there is no solution. Pistons and valves have appeared in the room. Gas vapor goes in and out of its theater box 40 times a second. And for that, there is no solution. Something besides my will loves the woman I love. I love my children, though I did not know them before they came. I change every day for the winter dark of late December. There is no solution. Another thing that there's no solution with is our parents. There's no solution there. You've tried to change them? Forget it. They're never going to change. And what's more, they're probably right. So I'm going to read you one poem that I've written about my father. I would like to read you a whole group, but I'll read you this one. Because what we're talking about here now is not to try to escape so much, but to come down and look at your family for what they are and so on. Does that make any sense to you? When you try to come down and look at your parents, not to blame them, just to see them. I was doing some men's work one day with a seminar, and a man said to me, Robert, you know, yesterday for the first time in my life I saw my father as a human being and not as a myth. I said, how old are you? He said, 46. Well, it's in that area somewhere. All right, this is a poem. It's the first poem I wrote in my father's presence. I had never written a line in his presence. And he was alcoholic all his life, and so that means a lot of fear, a lot of grief, a lot of shame. Is that right? Yeah? I never felt ashamed when I was with the tree, so I'd write poems in the presence of a tree. But he was in the hospital with pneumonia, and I went down to see him. He's in Madison, Minnesota, and I went down to see him, and I wrote this poem. My father at 85. His large ears hear everything. A hermit wakes and sleeps in a hut underneath his gaunt cheeks. His eyes blue, alert, disappointed, and suspicious. Complain, I do not bring him the same sort of jokes the nurses do. He really cheers up when they come in, you know. His eyes blue, alert, disappointed, and suspicious. Complain, I do not bring him the same sort of jokes the nurses do. He is a small bird waiting to be fed, mostly beak. An eagle, or a vulture, or the Pharaoh's servant just before death. You've seen the photographs of mummies? Or the Pharaoh's servant just before death. My arm on the bed rail rests there, relaxed, with new love. All I know of the troubadours I bring to this bed. I do not want or need to be shamed by him any longer. It shocked me, that line, when I wrote it. I'll read it to you again. I do not want or need to be shamed by him any longer. The general of shame has discharged him. He's probably a colonel or a lieutenant. The general of shame has discharged him and left him in this small provincial Egyptian town. If I do not wish to shame him, then why not love him? His long hands, large, vain, capable, can still retain hold of what he wanted. There were 6 farms. But is that what he desired? Some powerful river of desire flows through him. He never phrased what he desired. And I am his son. I'll give you the end of that again. The end of it depends on the difference between wanting and desiring. In America, we only talk about what we want. Deodorant, refrigerators, more sitcoms. Is that what we actually desire? Does that make any sense to you? The more and more television we have, the less we know what we desire. We have to go to centuries like the 12th and the 13th when people actually talk about what they desired. They desired God. They didn't care about deodorants. And Jung helped me with that with my father, because he said every alcoholic has a terrific longing for the Spirit, only he chooses the wrong Spirit. It's good. Very good. Shows an earth spirit. If I do not wish to shame him, then why not love him? His long hands, large, vain, capable, can still retain hold of what he wanted. But is that what he desired? Some powerful river of desire flows through him. I could feel it in his body. Some powerful river of desire flows through him. He never phrased what he desired. He never put into language what he desired. Is that right? He never put into language what he desired, and I am his son. I know I should stop soon so you can ask me some questions, but I'm going to read one more poem. What we're talking about here is a time in your early life when you can fly and move, and we call that the first ascent. But then there comes a time in which you have to go down and look at your parents and look at your grief. Does that make sense to you? And sometimes people have to become alcoholics or failures before they can get permission to do that. You hear me? You can do it consciously or unconsciously. You can embezzle in the bank and get stuck in the can. That's called doing it unconsciously. Or you can decide to go down and look at your parents and whatever happened, whatever you didn't look at in childhood. Then they say there's a second descent after that. And if I had time, I'd read you a whole bunch of poems here. In the second descent, one thing that's said is you have to take matter with you this time. Secondly, you got to have different parents. For the second ascent, you got to stop whining about your parents and say, okay, there they are, and that's fine. Now, where can I find other parents? In school, that's called finding a mentor. In the profession, it's called finding a mentor. If you listen to Around Midnight, all the black jazz pianists have always had second fathers. Second. All the jazz musicians have had another father. Is that right? You understand what I'm saying? For women in women in Minnesota, I often mention this in other parts of the country, I say women in Minnesota need this very much. And they will sometimes choose Meridel LeSueur as a second mother. And I said, women in Minneapolis will call a Meridel LeSueur weekend just to look at her. Could I look like that at 70? Wow. Could I be as tough as her when I'm 70? Great. Anyway, I don't know what I'm saying, but I'll just go on here. Both men and women need second parents so we can get away from our own and stop complaining about them. Tell them off once and forget it. Or thank them once and forget it. This is a poem by Rumi, the Persian poet. He's the greatest poet that I've come near anywhere. Born in 1207, died in 1273. All of his work is connected with the second descent. So I'm going to read you a poem now. And this is translated by Coleman Barks. Can you still hear me all right back there? A poem of the second descent. Their tradition, we come down from another place here. And when we really get down here, then it's time to turn and go back. Yes, please. No, the second ascent. It's like we have the first ascent, which is given to us in our genes. Then we have the descent. And then we must forget not to stay there. 10 years in that is enough. Then it's time to make the second descent. That doesn't happen before you're 50 or something like that. In China, 60, that's why they like old people, because before everybody never trust a person under 60. That's what they say in China. Are you ready for it then? For those of you who don't know it, this is a poem by Rumi, the great poet of the Muslims, greatest poet of the Sufis. All day I think about it, and then at night I say it. Where did I come from? What am I doing here? I have no idea. This drunkenness began in some other tavern. Their tradition is that when you start to ascend the second time, you'll feel a kind of drunkenness which has nothing to do with alcohol. You understand me? Yeah. And then he's so sweet. He says, this drunkenness began in some other tavern. And I'm sure of that. And when I get around back to that place, I'll be completely sober. Meanwhile, I'm like a bird from another a continent living in this aviary. And the day will come when I fly off. Who is it that speaks words with my mouth? Who is it that hears words with my ear? Who is it that sees things with my eyes? If I could just get one sip of an answer, I could break out of this prison for drunks. Now I can't get back there on my own. Let whoever brought me here take me back. You ever heard drunks say that? Let whoever brought me here take me back. This poetry, I never know what I'm going to say. And when I'm through the saying of it, I get very quiet and hardly speak at all. I'm going to do this once more with the bouzouki. And I want you to laugh at the jokes in it this time and not be so sober. We connect the second descent with sermons, but it's a bad thing. In the ancient time, they went to church by dancing. When we can get the pews out of the Lutheran church, we'll be in much better shape for the second descent. Every day I think about it, and then at night I say it. Where did I come from? What am I doing here? I have no idea. This drunkenness began in some other tavern. This drunkenness began in some other tavern. And when I get around to that place, I'll be completely sober. Meanwhile, I am like a bird from another continent, living in this aviary. And the day will come when I fly off. Meanwhile, who is it that hears words with my ears? Who is it that sees snow with my eyes? Who is it that speaks poems with my mouth? You know, I want to go back, but I can't get there on my own. Let whoever brought me here take me back. Let whoever brought me here take me back. This poetry, I never know what I'm going to say. And when I'm out of the saying of it, I get very quiet and hardly speak at all. Now we have 8 or 10 minutes for questions.
Excuse me just a moment.
Yes.
There are books available for sale in the hallway behind the auditorium, and Robert will be available to sign a few of them. The winner of the raffle is Fran Wilkie.
Where's Fran Wilkie?
Back there.
Oh,
Great.
good.
If you go back to the table in the hallway where you signed up.
There's a Toyota without a license out there. You get the Toyota, you know.
Okay. And then in February, the Friends will be sponsoring a Meet the Author series, which will include appearances by Dave Wood, Nora Hall, Deborah Keenan, and Lon Otto. And there's information about that also in the hallway.
Thank you, James. Do you know James Sitter, all the work he does with making marvelous books? He has a place where it's the best printing outfit in Minnesota, and he makes these gorgeous, beautifully printed books. That's James Sitter. You have to sit a lot doing it, too. Now, anyone ask me questions? They don't have to be deep, you understand? We can go back anywhere you want to. Anyone want to ask me anything? Are you kidding? I'll sell you the Brooklyn Bridge if you'd like to buy it. George Bush is a man who doesn't read books. Someone asked him a few months ago, have you read any book? And he thought he had read The Robe. This doesn't make him an evil man. It just means all he gets is what he takes in through the ear. And what if people are speaking nasty and stupid things to him? Then what? I mean, books are in the world so that you don't have to depend on your friends and the people who support you, isn't that right? So I think in general, he is a man of some energy and some goodwill. But his having been head of the CIA does not bode well for us. Anyone else? Yes, please. I'm sorry, what? See, that's a wonderful question, she says. What about fear? The question is, going down in the Greek times, you see, Hades was not full of fire. Hades in Greek times was a moist place underneath the ground. And you were hoped to drop down there 2 or 3 times every day. That's Bach's work, is to drop you into a moist place underneath your consciousness. And we feel it sometimes when you're in a wedding or a funeral. When you start to weep, you've gone down into Hades, where it's moist, and that refreshment is wonderful. But we have that confused with hell. And secondly, we have it confused with depression. So a very elementary thing to say that's been helpful to me is that if you are afraid to go down consciously, afraid to go down into your own grief and what happened to you in childhood, and you don't do it consciously, then a hand may come up from below and pull you down, which is called depression. And when we get into depression, we have a fear that we'll never get out. That mood, I know it. You wake up in the morning, you're depressed, you don't know where it came from, and I don't want to see any of my friends, I'm too boring. They'll see how boring I am. And I feel it's going to last my whole life. But it turns out one day it's gone. But for some people it isn't gone for 2 or 3 years. So this fear of that can be very, 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 very clear and wonderful. What is said is that art and poetry is one way where you can go down at your own pace and consciously. That means if you're a painter, you get rid of some of the pinks and start putting in blacks and see what happens. Instead of doing trees with leaves on them, you do some bare trees. And just see what happens. Your psyche will always move at the proper speed for you in going down. Therapists are also in this world to help us go down. But art is sometimes we're a little more in control of that. Does that help at all? It's a wonderful question she asked. How can you go down if you and your family and everyone has always been afraid of doing that? That's a serious question. Yes, please. Yes. Jung, for example, said, many women do not use their creative abilities because they're trained to take care of other people and so on. And he said, if you find out that the plates are breaking in your kitchen and the pans are falling off the walls, this is a little hint to you. Nothing wrong with your house. You're not using your creative energy, and the creative energy is trying to get in a hold of you and to mention it to you by busting 4 cups in a row. And in the Gospel of Thomas, Christ has this incredible saying, I think it's maybe number 54. What you bring out of yourself will save you. If you do not bring it out, it will kill you. Is that clear? If you do not bring your creativity out, it will kill you. How does it do it? By giving you a very creative disease. That's a possibility. Most of the artists and writers that I know are healthier than other people, especially when they get to their 50s. Have a lot of energy and... Yes, please. Yes. It's only an hour. What can we do? I did a lot of work during the Vietnam War in the political area, and I still read some of those. The same thing that's going on in Vietnam with killing the Vietnamese is still exactly what Bush and Reagan want to do with the Nicaraguans. There's something in the United States that cannot bear the vision of an independent people. Cannot bear it. And the more the Sandinistas really want to do what they do, there's a huge thing. I mean, a friend of mine in the Vietnam War said to me, Robert, you'll never understand the Vietnam War. I said, why not? He says, because you're not paranoid enough. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, listen, you're trying to think out this stuff with the Vietnam War. I want to tell you what the United States is now. It's a big thing up here, and when it sees something moving at the borders, it goes, ah! Then it looks around, sees something else moving, ah! That's American foreign policy, Robert. You'll never understand it, because you're not from New York. That's what he said. All right. So Bush wants a kinder and gentler paranoia. That's what he wants. Go on. Go on. There's a little booklet for sale out there, probably called The Pillow and the Key. I've been writing about a fairy story from Europe in the Grimm Brothers, which gives the stages of male initiation as it was understood maybe 4,000 BC. And this has been preserved by the Grimm Brothers, and I'm simply taking that and working on it. I was working on it this morning. I'm doing about a 250-page amplification of that book, with saying everything I know about what's happened to me as a man and other men. And so there's one out there, I think, called The Pillow and the Key. I've just finished the second part, and I was working this morning on the third part. It'll eventually come out about a year from now. It'll be called Iron John, a book about male feeling and male initiation. I've been doing a lot of thinking about the difference between the male mode of feeling and the female mode of feeling. They're two wonderful modes. The female mode of feeling is marvelous, with its attention to interior material, with its attention to the earth, with its attention to the flow of things, marvelous. But the mothers are doing better in teaching their daughters the female mode of feeling than our fathers are due in teaching us the male mode of feeling. Does that make sense to you? Our fathers are not doing well in teaching us the male mode of feeling. It's been a tradition in the United States that men don't talk anyway, so how can they do it? In the immigrant times, you know, the men are out 12, 13, 14 hours a day. When they came back, you were lucky if they said 2 words to you. To your son, get it done. That's called initiation in the United States. Get it done. And the women were the ones that carried all of the cultural work all through the 19th century with their various things they did in South Dakota, North Dakota, and so on. Yes, sir. I'm in favor of women deciding in abortion myself. Number one, I think that, to me, I understand how people feel about those that are profoundly against abortion. I think it's a bad thing to happen. At the same time, the egotism of human beings is unbelievable. The number of people we have on the earth now, it's killing all of the animals. Who said that animals are less important than we are? Who said that we can continue to put human beings in and kill all the animals? So for those people, I say, I want you to go and stop protesting in Atlanta and go down and protest at the burning of the rainforest and the killing of those creatures. If you really believe in creatures, then do that. Nothing is more amazing than the way even our literature is composed completely of human beings. We're the greatest on earth. It says so in the beginning of Genesis. We put on this earth to, put our heels on the top of every other creature. That thing should be rewritten in the beginning of Genesis.
Two different questions. First, when you say opponent, what are you doing with
don't know. That's a good question he had. You know, I began reading like this, holding a book. I remember the first reading I gave was over in the Newman Center. Jim Wright and I gave a reading in 1962, maybe. We both stood exactly like this. And during the Vietnam War, I remember a friend of mine wanted to bring me to the campus, Amherst, and the students did. The students said, "We want to bring Robert by," and the man said, "No way. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put you through that." And they said, well, he said, "I saw the first reading that Robert Bly ever gave, and he looked like an undertaker, he was dressed like an undertaker, and he talked like an undertaker." And so the kid said, "Are we talking about the same person?" I don't know. So anyway, I did that, and then I realized it's wrong to do that. It's wrong to read through a book. A poem is a communication between human beings. So at that point, you have to begin to memorize them so that you can meet people's eyes. Does that make it clear to you? Then I suppose I got to be about 40 years old, 35 or so, and I realized that, I started to memorize the poems then. I'd walk around in western Minnesota on the roads at night so the farmers don't run over you with tractors, which they'll do if they see you memorizing poems. Anyway, so I was memorizing poems, and then I noticed my hands start to move. Why should I be surprised? Isn't it said that poems have rhythm? And now, for example, if I'm moving my hands, I can read for 3 hours. If I hold them down like this, it takes a lot of energy not to move your hands, you know. Italians found this out. Norwegians haven't found it out yet. Therefore, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just moving it like this, and whatever I do feels right to me. It doesn't matter. My hands want to talk too, you know. Why should my mouth only talk? Thank you. We'd better stop, shall we? Yes, one more over there. Well, for those of you who have alcoholic parents, you know what that is like. One thing that hit me when it was told to me 3 or 4 years ago is that one thing that happens with an alcoholic parent is that they're not satisfied with their childhood, they want yours too. In a way, every alcoholic parent turns us into an adult too early. We have to go and take care of them. Isn't that right? I had to do that, go and find my father, and so on and so on. My mother should not have allowed me to do that. I mean, she shouldn't have asked me to do that. But she did. And it usually happens that way. And as children, we turn up into grown-ups, and our parents become children. That throws one off considerably. And what's more, you're angry because your childhood has been taken away. And the second thing is you begin to realize clearly that this person prefers a bottle to you. I mean, it hit me with a real shock when I realized that. And my low self-esteem, my reading like a funeral director when I was 36, obviously is connected with that low self-esteem when I recognized underneath, way underneath, that my father preferred a bottle to me. Does that help with this? That's why we need to go into that and then somehow let it go. I get self-esteem from other parents. Joseph Campbell was one of my parents. And I would read with him. And when he would praise me for what poems I read, I would receive from him what I did not receive in that way from my father. Does that make any sense to you? We need to look for those people. They're not going to come to us. You need to look for an older man or an older woman. And you have to look and find one you love, and then you have to go out and make the contact. Scary as that is. That's my own advice to you. I might as well give you some advice. I think we must stop now. Thank you very much.